Good evening and welcome to Crosstalk. My name is Reverend Tom Otieno. Crosstalk is the place where we bring the cross to the conversation as mediator, as light giver, as one that shows the way, Jesus himself. And so today we recognize several things. Number one, Kenyans are angry. Why are they angry? The cost of living has gone up. Why are they angry? Cost of fuel has gone up. Why are they angry? Taxes have been increased. But what do we do? The focus of our show is what are we going to do? Because we are the church. And we as the church have to focus not just on what has gone wrong, but what are we going to do? In the studio here with me today, Rafael Obonyo, a public policy expert. Karibu, Rafael.
Thank you so much, Reverend, for having me.
And then we have Reverend Dennis Ntumbi, who is a political and governance analyst coming to this show again. Karibu sana, Dennis.
Asante sana, Reverend, for having me.
Okay, gentlemen, thank you for making time, and let's get right to it. How do we find ourselves here? We have godly leaders, we have, a godly cabinet, we have, everything seems to be ducks in a row. How do we find ourselves here? And there are no right answers, there are no wrong answers. You go for it.
Yeah, first of all, let me appreciate, the platform to have a conversation on this particular issue, because it's extremely important. And of course, having a discussion with two reverends. That's an honor and a great opportunity, but it's also fire,
Yes.
Yeah, but how do we find ourselves here? Of course, it's change of regime. We had elections, then change of regime. And of course, the new regime or the new leadership had a particular plan, had a particular program, had a particular model of and a manifesto that they were to implement. And part of what was expected, or the basis on which perhaps the new government was elected, was one, to address the question of joblessness, the issue of, end the high cost of living, and things like that. So there was really high expectations on this government. And so that is how we find ourselves in a situation where people had expectations, but now, you see people sometimes are not as patient, so they cannot give you time. You don't have all the time to implement and deliver on the expectations that they have. So one is the expectations, two is the change of leadership, but also we look at globally, situations are not rosy in any country. Right now, the UK Premier is having a huge problem with the populace there. They're saying he's not addressing their needs. For example, UK was supposed to move away from use of fossil fuel and start embracing renewable energy. That is not happening. There's something, the problem of UK and Russia, most of resources are heading there. So I think there are local factors, domestic factors, but there are also global factors that have brought us to where we are now, where cost of production is going up. Prices of commodities are going up, and there's a lot of, I think things are complicated, and there's a lot of sophistication and creativity that is needed to address this.
I'll come back to you on that because we want to know exactly, Dennis. How are we here? We're supposed to be prospering.
Comme ci, comme ça.
Comme si, comme ça.
Yes, we shall prosper. We shall prosper.
Yes.
Reverend and my brother Obonyo, is such a great opportunity to get to speak to you and to get to speak to the house of faith. And the Bible tells us that we must be able to speak truth to each other. The Kenya Kwanza government was elected on the hope and the promise that they are going to work on this patient called Kenya that has been ill for a while. And indeed, Kenya has gone through a rigorous governance administration that has not been very healthy. For many years, when you look at independence, we see that the many years that Moi took, we had bad politics and a bad economy. Kibaki took, and he tried to revive the economy, but fails to revive or deal with the bad politics. Uhuru came, and his regime was a double tragedy: bad politics and bad economy. So William Ruto took, and he must deal with a bad economic platform and a bad political platform.
Bad policies and bad politics.
Exactly. So whenever you have a patient, the first thing you need to do is, a patient like Kenya, you must quit approaching them from a general GP perspective, a general practitioner, where they're telling you they have had a bad headache, they have been having a running stomach for years, and you give medicine failing to deploy specialty tactics to be able to know the true health of this patient. And now I guess between this year 1 that Kenya Kwanza government has been there and year 2, what we are going to be knowing is the reality of how sick Kenya is. And how intense the situation is. And people are going to see that this is indeed the nature, the character, the stature, the strength of the nation that we have. And leaders are supposed to be peddlers of hope, so consistently they might not tell you the truth of how dense matters are. But having the privilege of getting some internal information, I can tell you it will take the Holy Spirit to resurrect Kenya, and we have hope. The truth is that we have hope. We have an economy that is in tatters, and we cannot fail to ignore that. We have never had stable politics for a very long time. You know, this country has even gone under, issues of post-election violence and whatever it is that there is. We have suffered grand types of insecurities, from terrorism, name it. We haven't had a stable country for a very long time. And this is the opportunity that we have to stop talking half myths and half truths and table the full report of this patient called Kenya and ask ourselves one paramount question. What will it take to have a prosperous nation?
Okay.
And when I look at that, then I see the manifesto that Kenya Kwanza tabled, and I saw hope, and that's the reason why I supported them. The truth is, we also sit on a chronological timeline whereby we've come through several global shocks that we're not in control of. COVID, wars, and many of those dynamics. And the reason why they're affecting us is because we don't have any internal resilience to be able to produce even grain for ourselves at the end of the day. The githeri you eat, the beans that you take on your table, the oil that you use to fry, the soap that you use, everything that you use in your house is not even locally produced at the end of the day. So we are in a country that you ask ourselves, is this like a mere shibboleth? Is emptiness of grandeur? But then how do we get to fix our country without talking half-truths and half-myth? Okay. And I believe that you're going to ask questions based on the energy sector that is densely inadequate and heavily, it carries a major responsibility of trying to resuscitate our economy, both in terms of driving it and both in terms of paying debts. And really, we must look at this country critically and also not just ask of the role of government, ask what is the role of citizens to try and prop this country together. But most importantly, Reverend, is to ask what is the role of the church in terms of propping this nation? Are we just going to be a church that prophesies presidents into power, or are we also going to be a church that is a participant in ensuring that this country comes to its prophetic destiny?
We'll get to that. But I want to specifically localize on the cost of fuel. Raphael, where do you think the government is getting it wrong, or why is it where it is? Is it mitigatable? The government has said our hands are tied. it's international, it's what. But what is your take? Is there anything, any mitigation that can be done? Taxes, what? Because we know it is taxed. What is that?
One of the economic arguments that was advanced by the current regime, Kenya Kwanza government, was that we need to rely on our own local resources for development, because public debt was weighing heavy on us and was almost stagnating our economy. That is true. And one good thing that has been done or has been said or the government is focusing on is to reduce borrowing and the cost of debt, which is a great thing. But now the danger is, if we are going to rely on our local resources, what are the avenues for raising those local resources? One key avenue for any government, and for this government, is taxation. And so what has the government done was to increase taxes, increase rates of taxes, in the hope that they are going to raise the revenues that are required for this kind of economy. But this economy has become fairly complicated, that perhaps taxation alone might not generate the kind of resources that we need. We are now, you saw the control of budget released a report and was saying a significant portion of our revenues are going towards servicing the debt. The other significant payment that we are making is wage bill. Really, really high.
So this is a patient in resuscitation.
This is the patient in resuscitation. And then now comes to fuel, which is your specific question of how come we have the cost of fuel rising. Of course, the global factors that we all know and sometimes and largely are out of our control as a country. But then there is something that the government is in control of also, which is taxation of petroleum products. And I think the attitude of the government has been that this is a consumptive product. This is a product that people are consuming, so it's not necessarily being used for production per se. So what have they done? They've continued to tax these petroleum products. They removed subsidies, which was seen to be a good idea at the beginning, but it's coming to be a pain for people because there's no relief. If you remove subsidies, it means that you are letting the market to have its say. And when you let the market have its say, the market will take you whichever direction. And so are people willing to go that direction? For example, without subsidies, you let the market decide on the cost of fuel? Maybe not. If you look at taxation, during Kibaki's time, VAT on fuel was not there. Now we have VAT almost at 16%, it's going to increase to 18%. So while I agree to a large extent that government has no control on global factors, external factors that are causing rise in fuel prices, government has control on perhaps the level of taxation they can put on fuel or petroleum products. They have control over how they can cushion the citizens against the pain of paying high costs for fuel. And remember, if we do not manage the cost of fuel, it's going to have ripple effect. Right now, transportation is going to go up. Cost of doing business is going up. Businesses are now operating in more or less uncertain situation because they do not know what is going to happen. You've had government officials, some government officials saying this will continue and it will get worse. So I think it's upon the government to think fast and properly on how do we cushion people and citizens against the rising cost of living, against the rising cost of, prices of essential commodities like fuel. And it is not true that government has no control. It has control to some level. Maybe the government does not have control because of the global factors, but there are certain local factors that can be tackled by government.
And that's exactly what we are going to say. We are going to come up with ideas when we come back from the break. We are taking a break, but when we come back, what are we to do? We're not just going to sit back and complain and get angry, but we are going to then ask ourselves the question, what must be done? We're taking a break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
Next week on She.
It's just amazing being able to have those multiple children, but it also can be a science and art and can be also very overwhelming.
You know those times when you actually feel you're breastfeeding and they're crying and you're like, I really wish I could swallow you back.
It's not easy having 4 with a year. Everyone is thinking, sure, if you're not pregnant, you're breastfeeding.
Enjoy every season. Not only do they grow, they change so quickly.
With their own personality differently and embrace you.
That's next Wednesday at 8:30 p.m. on She.
Welcome back to Crosstalk. We are talking about Kenya, and at the moment we seem to have a lot of problems. But as people who are people of the faith, we come up with solutions. And so we are going into that section where we say, what are we going to do? Before we went to the break, I had asked you, Raphael, the question about cost of fuel. So I will ask you, Reverend Dennis.
Yes.
How is the cost of fuel at 211? And is there anything the government can and should do?
That's one of the critical questions that every Kenyan is asking themselves now. And I bet possibly as we speak, one of the most revered jobs is to be a petrol station attendant. You may make more friends than you shouldn't. I was in Uganda the other day, and the cost of fuel there was quite disabling, even given the fact that they are producing crude oil and many of those dynamics. So Kenya, there was a bit of relief. However, there's one thing that my brother has mentioned here in terms of subsidies, as I go to the construct of the cost, is that we studied the model of subsidies and whether it was a relief or not. And truly so, even currently looking at it, our brothers and sisters in Tanzania went the subsidy way, and their fuel is much more expensive than ours as we speak. When you look at the exchange rate of 16 and thereabout, you realize maybe I think there is almost about, possibly, is it 256 a liter? I'm not sure, but roughly about there, 256 to 226. Anybody who's listening to us can check. But they went the subsidy way, interestingly enough, and the result is a 50 billion plus debt and a rise of fuel prices by 27 bob above us. So subsidy, we disqualified that you cannot subsidize consumption. You must then subsidize production. And it is true, this conversation about the cost of fuel, we must discuss it in threefold. Number one, you cannot fail to discuss the cost of fuel in this country without failing to look at the overburdening taxes and levies. And then you need to ask yourself, what is the genesis of this? And does government have control over this? The question is, government has control, but not currently. Because those taxes and levies are tied to our appetite on borrowing. And they are part of covenants by possibly the Bretton Woods organizations. Is when you go to a bank and you want to borrow money, the bank will ask you, how are you going to pay? And they will look at the overall opportunities that you have, and they will say, Reverend Tom, there's that shamba that you have on Kiambu Road. I don't know if you have one, but maybe I may be.
I receive.
Go and get some revenue from that, then you come and we talk.
Okay.
So some of these levies and taxes are part of a covenant that we have with our lenders for us to be able to be credit worthy. So can we revise them? Possibly no. Can we restructure and renegotiate them? Possibly yes. How far back are we looking at the appetite for borrowing and the appetite for revenue for us to be able to satisfy lending? It's possibly you're looking at the last 20, 25 years. There is nothing that this current regime can do on that front. Is it the truth? Yes, at the end of the day. Number two, when you come to the issue of OPEC and them reducing the fuel price so that they can increase it on many of those dynamics, when you look at the Russia-Ukraine issue, do we have control over it? We don't. At the end of the day, there's nothing much that we can do about it. When you look at our exchange rate, our inflation, our shilling, and whatever it is, we borrow, we buy by the dollar. The Federal Reserve Bank came and said, our interest rates are going up, our shilling depreciated overnight. Is there much we can do about it? Yes. The G2G arrangement that we can buy via Kenya shilling is a question that we need to ask ourselves. But then you look at our partners and they're asking ourselves possibly, what are we going to do with a shilling that is depreciating, whatever it is. But that is a functional arrangement that government is putting in place. If you look at the fuel stabilization fund, that is giving a relief currently of 6 shillings per litre. It's working, and that one has been in place for a long time. The other thing that can be done is we are over-reliant on fossil fuel. When you march us in South Africa, you realize that on green energy, which is where our president is pushing us to, South Africa on solar is over 80% at the end of the day in terms of the reliance on solar. And Kenya is blessed on green and clean energy. But we are below 2%. Even this outfit that we are in a studio is not powered by solar. You're relying on this thing that you're claiming is expensive, yet the sun is up at the end of the day. But is it cheap installing solar? Perhaps not. So Parliament must go back and relook at how can you make it easy for people to use and install equipments and import and whatever it is that
so
there is.
Alternative energy.
At the end of the day, alternative energy is the way that we must go. We must also look at other sources of revenue so that every time we are going to borrow, we need to borrow because we will need to borrow. As a country, we have not developed to the point that we can self-sustain ourselves. And I believe it's a journey that we have to walk in the next 15 years. And that is what His Excellency is talking about. So that every time we look at an opportunity to raise funding or revenue, we must not look at this sector that is already crippling in terms of one taxes after another, one source of revenue after another. We must then look at what are the opportunities perhaps on coal. What are the opportunities on the oil that we have in Turkana? What other opportunities do we have to raise revenue thereabout? But one of the things that we have to ask ourselves as Kenyans, what is going to be the bill to bring this patient to health? That's one of the things that we have to ask ourselves. And guess who is going to pay? Kenyans have to pay this. Either we auction this country and we ask foreigners to pay this bill for us, or we fundraise, and fundraising is this taxes thing, and make sure that in the next 10 years, this patient is back to health and we are strong. And that is what the prophetic is saying. The prophetic is saying that Kenya has a great destiny. And usually when somebody tells you a prophecy, say, you will be rich and you'll be prosperous. You don't even have fare to get from church to home. You're wondering, what is it saying? But the Spirit is able to speak that which isn't, because it is by the Spirit that this country will prosper. So we have to speak. The other thing that is absent is this question of half-truth and half-myth. The people that have been missing in this dialogue are sector experts. You realize that sector experts in the oil and gas industry are mum, they're not talking.
And why is that?
It's usually like that when there's a crisis in the sector, that the experts in that sector are usually quiet. And what happens is that the general public is not quite updated. So we want sector experts to come and speak to the citizens and even explain this conversation to them at the end of the day so that people can get to understand more. But I think the truth of the fact is that we got ourselves into some painful covenants. We are in a bad place when it comes to our debt and our repayment plans. But the truth is we are navigating. Eurobond is coming. My brother knows. At the end of the day, we have some serious payments that are coming. And if we default on that, then we will be in trouble like other nations.
Be blacklisted.
We'll be blacklisted. Our debt worthiness,
Credit worthiness.
credit worthiness is going to be implicated. And when that is implicated, the shilling will suffer more. And you will have to be producing more money to buy bread than it should currently is. But that is not our portion in the name of Jesus. What we are saying is that we must live in the reality that Kenya needs to get the right medication, the report is out, and we need to ensure that this patient gets the best health approaches and interventions whatsoever. And it is for us to pay the bill. And this is an issue that has come from many years. But the opportunity that we have, as I close on this discussion, we must navigate out of this habit. And what habit am I saying? This habit that some government officials have a great appetite for debt and borrowing. And that one is not translated into developments or uplifting the living standards of Kenyans at the end of the day. Majority of this debt that was borrowed, perhaps in the last 15 years, is stuff that we don't see reflected today. At the end of the day, Kenyans would never mind to pay for an expensive bill that is a plate that is on the table. And they can see this is a ribeye steak with nice fries on the table. And this is the true bill, and it's reflected there at the end of the day. But when you're brought for, dried fries with some nyanya that is smelling, and somebody's asking you to pay expensively for it, then that becomes a problem. But we must navigate out of half-truth and half-myth, and we must have a critical discourse as Kenyans to see how do all players who are called Kenya genuinely and sincerely, without the government being opaque, how do we help each other to make sure that this country that is only our country navigates forward in proper health?
Raphael, thank you, Reverend Dennis. Raphael, fix this for us as well. What are your ideas?
I mean, just like Dennis, Reverend Dennis has said, I remain hopeful, and we have to be hopeful. And like
what are the practical things?
But the practical things, there are practical things that we need to do. One, for me, is in addition to checking our appetite on date.
Practical and painful.
Yeah, for me, one is to seal corruption loopholes. That is a major problem that we have, that most of resources that we're even generating locally are not going towards tackling the problems.
The investments we said we would invest in.
We're not investing. So we're losing a lot of money in corrupt ways, in corrupt deals. So we really need to seal those loopholes. Then whatever revenues we are raising are going to benefit us. Two, I think we really need to have an honest conversation with Kenyans and tell them, look, this is the situation. The unfortunate thing with the current government is that, just like Reverend did say, when you're on a campaign trail, there are certain promises that you make, but without knowing the situation of the patient. And now here you are, you have the patient, and you have said you're going to cure the patient. People are saying, what is happening?
It was presumed you had done your diagnostic process.
Now you're saying, man, this patient, it's not just a headache. We need to do some spinal injury. Sort of
spinal checkup
and surgery.
And reboot.
This is going to take, and people are saying, no, you said 1 hour. And you say, no, give me a week or give me a month and all that. So it is true, the situation is bad. And I think Kenyans need to be told, beyond, helping them with, making them more hopeful, it's also important to tell Kenyans the reality on the ground. But that is just in terms of hope and optimism. The other thing is the government needs to cut down on spending. I don't think the current government has done enough to cut down on spending. We are still spending too much. You go to government offices and the number of advisors are just too many in just one small office. All these people are being paid through the exchequer. So we need to find a way of cutting down on unnecessary and wasteful expenditures. That is the other thing. Three, it's a painful thing, but we really need to think on our governance model. Right now, if we look at our governance model, devolution, for example, if it is not checked, it is taking in absorbing a lot of resources that would otherwise go to development, but they're now being used on wage bill on devolved units. It's so high. Actually, they're saying 90% of resources that go to the counties are being used on salaries. So it's a governance. It's a governance model that perhaps we cannot be able to sustain. And lastly is, I think the current government needs to rethink the economic model. It was good when it was presented, but it seems like it's running short of what it was supposed to do. For example, no matter what you do, continuing to tax Kenyans only makes them angry and more angrier. So we need to rethink of what is this model, how can we sustain it?
What is the alternative to that?
I think we just need to be honest with Kenyans and tell them this economic model is, because it's been tried, Obama tried this bottom-up economic model. it reached midway and it was impossible to implement because the expectations are huge. People just expect money to come down. So I think we need to have an honest conversations with Kenyans and tell them, look, we promised this economic model, but it's not something that is implementable in this way. We have to tweak it a little bit so that Kenyans now understand that, yeah, bottom up does not necessarily mean that money is just trickling down, no taxes or anything like that. But in the minds of many Kenyans is that you say it bottom up, how come cost of living is going up? You say it bottom up, how come you're raising prices of commodities? So I think we really need to rethink this economic model, not really to change it in its entirety, but really help Kenyans understand that this is the way to implement it. But remember, while that is something quite hopeful and all of us will, that's the ideal. With the politicians, you know, they are in government just for, they see elections, and elections are coming up.
It's a short-term thinking.
Imagine next year, no one will want to hear about any other promises. People will be thinking about 2027 elections, and people will be in campaign mode again. So I think the government needs to chew gum while climbing the stairs, and it's a tough thing. There are no easy options, you know. And like you're saying, some of the things are also out of the current government's control. Because, for example, if you're saying you're paying debt and it's pegged on taxes that you're raising and all that, you have no control over that because here you took money and you promised to pay, and they want to see how you're going to pay that money. Look, we have the government-to-government deal that we had with Saudi Arabia on fuel. It's due in December. We need to pay that money. It's in billions. We have the Eurobond coming up that we need to pay by next year. That is going to leave a huge dent. So situations might get worse, and Kenyans need to be brought on board and be told what direction do we take together. And I think that way, even if you're feeling pain, you feel the pain, but you're saying this is a journey that is shared.
So the truth needs to be spoken out.
The truth needs to be spoken out, yeah. That the patient is extremely ill, not just ill, extremely, it's critical.
So as we think. Well, I'm going to take closing comments. Let me start with you, Reverend Dennis, and then we'll come to Raphael.
Thank you. It's imperative to know that, sincerely speaking, the government is working and it's doing something. As painful as it may look like, today, 1.9 billion shillings has been pumped into price pump stabilization, as per the law. Subsidizing production. A lot of money has gone into fertilizer. Sincerely speaking, this country is going into a bumper harvest. So even if fuel is spinning, your ugali on the table will be in abundance, as speaking, and that's a positive trajectory. The pain is not as wholesome as it was. Even if we are saying that this patient is sick, is that there are areas of this patient that have been quickly stabilized at the end of the day. We are where we are as a country, we must realize, because of our political choices over the years. So you as a citizen, you cannot remove yourself from the blame game. You are part and parcel of where this country has gone to. Sincerely speaking, you have done some bad political decisions over the years. And Article 1 of the Constitution, and even when you look at the preamble of the Constitution, it puts you squarely into this smack stack in developing and advancing this nation. Now, looking at where we are going to, I see light. And because of the understanding of where this country is by the current government, and at the end of the day, the realization by the citizens themselves of the gravity of this health status of this country, is that the citizens are more alive and aware to the issues that are plaguing this nation, and thereby they're likely to deploy their own small and little interventions thereabout. Bottom up must work, it will work, and it's working. Why am I saying that? It's not trickle down, because trickle down is what we threw away. It is not about, a few guys controlling millions up there. For example, ensuring that majority or millions of farmers are receiving stabilization funds from the government at the end of the day. When you're looking at the Hustler Fund, that there is no small business person who should be stranded today because they do not have, affordable credit, is a thing of the past. So their interventions, though gradual and though they may look like small, they are stabilizing us. We would have closed shop a long time ago in this country. But one of the things that I want to ask the church is that the church in this country, by all means, is not poor. you know, and the church must start working on the issues that are affecting Christians together with government. We're not just going to be a church that prays the president into power or prophesies the president into power. We must also be a church that is focused on the harvest. When you look at the 7 feasts of the Lord at the end of the day, 3 of them are serious on the harvest. You know, at the end of the day, the health and the wealth of the nation is with the prophets and the apostles and the church. So therefore, the church cannot run outside the blame game of this country at the end of the day. But Kenya is for us all. We must make sure that we fix our families with our little areas of influence or whatever it is that there is. We must fix our communities, and we must deploy every means possible within our areas of influence. And we believe that Kenya will be a prosperous nation. Not because we are saying it, but because God has said it. And we believe in this God.
Indeed.
Amen.
Indeed. Raphael?
Yeah, I mean, just building on that very optimistic point, I think, yeah, of course, all of us desire Kenya to be great, and we should do everything to make Kenya great. But I think the government has a primary responsibility to do everything within its powers to alleviate the pain that Kenyans are going through. And they do that by implementing models that are less painful to Kenyans. So they really need to rethink what is the model that is going to be less painful. Or even if it is painful, how do we make Kenyans aware and on board in this journey? So that is one. The other thing is we need to have a comprehensive plan. I think one of the things that hasn't been done by previous and subsequent regimes is always that we tackle problems piecemeal. So we really need to think of how do we tackle this problem comprehensively. So we need a comprehensive plan to be able to tackle the challenge that we have in the country. And lastly is, while I sympathize with the government, I also want to challenge them that they took up the role, and it comes with the territory. I mean, that is so they need to do what needs to be done. They cannot run away from it, and they cannot shift the blame to anyone else. You see, Dennis, Reverend, when you walk into a room and you say, I'm a doctor, I'm going to cure this patient, you can't start saying that, no. I also need someone else to be in the room, or someone else has done this and that. Once you're in there, you need to do what needs to be done and do it right. And one of the things that perhaps from where I sit, I haven't seen being done, for example, is getting, and you just talked about sector experts, but also getting experts to be, not just experts, but people with know-how in specific areas to be on board, for example. Beyond the politics, how do we get people with the right minds, with the right heart, to be in places where they can impact and cause change and transformation that is required? I think that is something that is within the powers of government to say, look, so-and-so, you can help us with this. Please, regardless of your background or your inclination or whatever, help us to sort out this. I think government now needs to do that, so that what Reverend is saying, that Kenya belongs to all of us, truly is seen to belong to all of us, not just when people are facing challenges, but also when we need people to contribute their services, their expertise. We want to see that happening, and that way, even if it is painful, people are going to say, we've signed up for this. We are all willing to address this. So that also needs to happen. But all of us also need to be supportive to the government of the day, in the sense that if government fails, Kenya fails. And if Kenya fails, we have no other country.
We have no other Kenya.
Yes, so we all need to be on board in terms of providing solutions and helping where solutions are being provided to make sure things work.
I'm going to have to end it here.
He mentioned doctors, just as you end. On the operating table, any doctor who loses a patient, his education and his experience comes to an end. This patient called Kenya must never be lost. And because we know that this government was breathed in and brought in by God, we must also give the Holy Spirit adequate space to breathe in new life into Kenya. And we are not squarely saying that sometimes the government of the day may not have the requisite solutions to try. And I'm not saying that Kenya Kwanza doesn't have. I know that God has room to fix that which is dead, that a doctor cannot be able. His education and his experience cannot be able to go beyond that which is dying. So we know that the Holy Spirit has critical interest in this country. And on that note, I'm extremely helped and hoped, and I have hope that Kenya will be able to be one of the strongest, not actually one, the strongest nation in the world. And the smallest amongst us will be as strong as David.
Thank you. Thank you. Reverend Dennis Tumbi, thank you for making time and gracing this show. Rafael Obonyo, thank you for making time and gracing this show.
Thank you so much.
Viewers, we're talking about Kenya, our beloved country. And in spite of how we feel about the current situations, we must ask ourselves the second question: what is my responsibility and what is my role? Even as we challenge government to fix what it can, we must also do what we can to make this country a project that is viable. That's up to me and you. Love Kenya, pray for Kenya, and let us stay here and make it work. God bless you. Till next week, this has been Crosstalk. My name is Reverend Tom Otieno, and you have a good evening.